So the previous two videos we discussed the problems of polytheistic and non-monotheistic religions. So we've arrived at what's left, which is generic monotheism. We begin with the 5 features of monotheism. There is one God, and that God is ultimate reality, versus no God or many gods, as we talked about before. This God is self-conscious. This God isn't just conscious, but self-conscious meaning self-aware. This God is also the highest being in every aspect, in which is good, including goodness itself. God has to be of it at the highest level, the most just, the most true, the most beautiful. And these can really be summed into metaphysically, axiologically, and soteriologically ultimate. Metaphysically meaning this being doesn't depend on anything else, which we'll talk about later. Axiologically, pretty much being this summation of this point, the highest being in every aspect. And soteriologically, meaning that this being is of the most importance to human goodness or salvation. If you don't want to call it salvation, you can call it the greater good of humanity, or really the greatest good of humanity. Next one, which is pretty much the metaphysical argument as well, that God is ontologically independent of other things, or God does not depend upon other things for life. For example, we depend upon our environment for survival, like we need oxygen. We depend upon food, water, but God does not depend upon any of these. And then finally, God is transcendent, meaning that there is a difference between God and mundane reality. Within the realm of generic monotheism, most of standard Western metaphysics is accepted within these terms. 1. There is more than one thing. 2. Those things are independent of our minds such that they are physical or material, aka they're not just an illusion, sort of what we talked about in some of the polytheistic and non-monotheistic religions last video. If I was to leave this room, this chair would continue to exist. This chair is independent from my mind. So there's more than one thing. Those things are independent of our minds such that they are physical or material. Those physical things exist in time, and we can correctly or incorrectly describe them. Pretty basic stuff. However, monotheism would extend a little bit further beyond Western metaphysics, and we would say that there are things beyond the physical or material that transcend these entities and are not composed by those physical entities, hence ultimate reality. And we talked about this sort of as a necessary conclusion that if matter had to be something that began, if the natural world, the natural universe, is something that had to begin, then that means something that isn't natural, that isn't matter, had to start it in what we would then call supernatural. This is what this point is talking about. So now we need to look at 2 kinds of dependence in order to fully grasp the understanding of generic monotheism. You have modal dependence, which is when A depends upon B, if it is that A exists only if B exists. Then you have something called grounding dependence, which is when A depends upon B if it is that only B can explain the existence of A. You may ask, what's the difference between these? A somewhat flawed example, but I think an example that's going to get the point enough across, is that modal dependence is a person's smile to the person smiling. The smile wouldn't exist without the person who's doing the smiling, so thus A exists, the smile, only if B exists, the person. Because if the person didn't exist, then their smile wouldn't exist. However, the smile, A, may not have grounding dependence on the person, B. To explain where the smile is grounded in, you may point to the environment and say the person, let's say, is witnessing a proposal in public, and the woman said yes. You may also use person B when discussing why these things made them smile, but most people, when asked, why is A existing, or the smile, like, why are they smiling? You would say, well, because a proposal just happened, which is where the smile is truly grounded in. A proposal happened, she said yes, that's happy, and that event is causing the smile. That event explains the existence of the smile. So according to generic monotheism, God doesn't ontologically depend on anything else, meaning he is not modally dependent nor grounded in anything else but himself. The question that is then asked, is mundane reality modally dependent or grounded in God? So the three categories of monotheism are as follows: Greek monotheism, Hindu monotheism, and Semitic monotheism. Greek monotheism says God is unchangeable. Thus, his knowledge consists of all necessary truths in which God also does not act in the world, nor did he create the world, for they believe that that would require God to change. If you've been following along, we can already see a problem with Greek monotheism, in that their God is not a creator God, meaning that this is not the God we discussed in our past conclusions, for the God we discussed is a first mover, an uncaused cause, an absolute to the potential, a fine-tuner, an intelligent and good designer, etc., etc. Hindu monotheism believes the physical universe has always existed, in which God did not create it, but if God were to cease to exist, the universe would also cease to exist. This is problematic as well, because we discussed the issues of an infinite regress, and the lack of a creator God belief, the lack of an intelligent design. Semitic monotheism, which is probably the one that you know the most, consists of mainly three groups: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and there's various offshoots of them, but those are the three big umbrella terms. They believe that the physical world did not always exist, but rather God created the physical world, and that the physical world not only modally depends on God, but is also grounded in God, which we also discussed somewhat in regard to morality, truth, objectivity, life itself, the structure of atoms, love, and various other topics that we will definitely come back to. So now what? Well, seeing that Semitic monotheism is the only monotheism that aligns with what we have discussed so far, and once again, if you disagree with any of my past videos or any of my past conclusions, then you're probably going to disagree with this video right here. So feel free to go back to those videos, watch them, see if my conclusions make sense, and feel free to comment so I can answer them. But the overall conclusion from those videos is that it is Semitic monotheism, which is the truest way of looking at the world and at religion and at the characteristics of this ultimate reality that exists, of this creator, of this deity that began everything, that caused everything, that is the source of everything. So now in the next video, we have to narrow it down even further, which we're going to be taking a closer look at Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Buckle up, because it's going to be a very long ride. Hope to see you there.